this is Jamie.
And this is Heather, and welcome to Using Our Inside Voice, a podcast where we awaken to the extraordinary meaning of everyday mundane life by passing it through a particle collider of different and differing perspectives. Today we're using our inside voice to talk about early shadow season, crazy sleep, and the vague experiences that we've got a sneaking suspicion will weave themselves into some kind of bigger picture and transform into a big, wild, wonderful reveal. Will it happen in this episode? Your guess is as good as ours.
I hope so. I truly hope so, because it's been a humdinger of a morning already. We've had all sorts of fun. We've had technical issues, and I had a asshole cat that woke me up at 5 o'clock this morning and would not let me go back to sleep. So I watched all the things and then promptly forgot all the things, like the minute I went to actually start talking to Heather about it. So this will be fun.
Don't you hate it when you think you're awake enough to do shit, but you're actually still in that twilight sleep? But you
Dude,
feel awake?
it happens. Like, it's been happening a lot lately. And this morning it's really thrown me because I was so like, ooh, awesome information. This ties a lot of things together. This is going to be great. I have shit to talk about. And then just now I'm like trying to go, okay, so this is kind of what I got this morning from watching all the things. And I went to go tell you, and I'm like, uh what the fuck did they say? Like, I don't remember. But here's the other weird thing. Like, this does happen from time to time. And usually what will end up happening is as soon as we actually get on to start talking about stuff, it's like it'll all kind of start coming back. And this is the same sort of thing that we've talked about before, where, like, I know a lot of people will get really bummed out if they're doing some sort of guided meditation and they fall asleep. They think that they've missed something.
Mm-hmm.
And something that we know to be true is that, sometimes your guides or your spiritual team or your angels or whoever it is that you work with will kind of sideline you and put you down for the count a little bit so that you're out of the way enough to actually receive whatever messages you need to receive. So it's not always a bad thing. And I have found that it actually starts to work that way, like, even after the fact. Like, if you're trying to talk about it and you can't recall it right away, don't get hung up on it. Just go about your business and keep going with your conversation. Start somewhere else. And most likely, where it needs to interject itself is where all of a sudden it will kind of pop into your head and be like, ta da!
Right.
So,
That happens to me all the time with dreams. Like, I'll wake up and I'll be like, whoa, that dream was weird and crazy. I gotta tell someone. And then there's no one around to tell at that moment. And so, thinking it's way too crazy to forget, of course, I make the rookie move of not writing it down. And then I do forget it. But then it gets triggered at the weirdest time, like 9 o'clock at night. And I'm talking to my brother and I'm like, oh my God, I gotta tell you about the whale.
it's like, here it is. I have a thing. I have a thing that I
Wh-
need to tell you.
Why? Why did the whale come up right now during this ghost show? I don't know.
Yeah, ghosts and whales. Who knew?
Ghosts and whales. You know, everybody
Ghosts and
knows they're
whales.
connected.
Is that ghosts and whales and ghosts and whales and ghosts and
No,
whales and ghosts and
no,
whales?
no.
It's not a boots
Absolutely
and
not.
it's not a boots
No.
and cat situation.
No, it is not a boots and
No.
hat. No.
Oh,
No.
oh! I thought
Ugh,
I had something there for a second.
you really did not think that.
So, anyways, I think one of the main things that we wanted to touch on today, and we were talking about it the other day, is shadow season on a whole. And this has been continuing to come up over the last couple months. I'm sure we've talked about it in other episodes. I know we've mentioned it, that it's coming earlier and earlier every year. We're seeing more. Of course, it's not like you have to wait until the leaves start to change color in order to do shadow work. Hell, if we waited for the leaves to change color, we'd never do shadow work because we live in Southern California and let's face it, we have no seasons. Um, but it's one of those things where generally when you're looking at the wheel of the year and the seasons and kind of how everything develops over the course of a year, there are natural times that certain things happen. And it's always interesting when you're
Ooh, wait,
considering
wait. You know what I just heard? This ties into
what
what you were saying right before we went on the air. What I just heard was you said if you look at the wheel of the year, there are certain times that lend themselves to certain work, that kind of
uh-huh.
thing. And what I just heard in my head was, well, there
Yes and no.
were. Yeah,
There
this
were,
ties into the time
yeah,
thing.
it does tie into the time thing. You're right. So, skipping ahead, or maybe not skipping ahead, if we're taking in consideration the conversation that we're about to have about time. Um, Another thing that's been coming up is the fact that it is getting harder and harder to time. And when I say it's getting harder and harder to time, that's kind of like us saying it's hard to brain today. It's getting harder and harder to follow along with a linear timeline. I feel like things are popping up when you don't expect them to, or things that you've kind of previously done are kind of floating back to the surface in a way that makes you question when certain events happened. um and one of the things that I watched this morning, again, I think we've mentioned before, we watch one of the additional channelers that we watch is Ann Tucker. And I've been kind of dragging my feet on watching some of her more recent stuff. So I watched the last three updates of hers. I watched that all this morning because Cat woke me up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I could not go back to sleep. Um, so one of the things that she was discussing that she channeled from the angels was that we're slowly shifting out of the kind of following of a linear timeline the way that we have been. And we're seeing evidence of that in, like, as we are trying to recall something, or if we're getting kind of lost in something that we're doing, and a significant amount of time has passed and it seems like 2 seconds has passed. Things like that, things of that nature. And this very much does fall in line with recognizing that shadow work is coming up um, in different quote unquote times now. It's either seeming that it's happening earlier or in different seasons. Generally, when you think about the wheel of the year and how seasons work and how the earth kind of works in tandem with those seasons, when you get to the fall is really the end of your, well, beginning and end of your harvesting season. You've already planted your seeds, you've tended to those seeds, you have those seeds have turned into fruit, and now you're harvesting that fruit or that bounty or what have you. You're seeing the fruits of your labor, basically. And as you're getting to the end of that process, there's whatever is left over that needs to be plucked off the vine so that new things can grow. So when you kind of put that into spiritual context, shadow season is about several things. But one of the things that happens during shadow season is that you're kind of getting rid of, or investigating those times when you've gathered something or you've gone through something, And there's, you know, pieces of that that you haven't dealt with yet that need to be shed or looked at and kind of evaluated, and you kind of figure out, well, is this something that needs to be carried with me into the next season, or is this something that I can take a deeper look at and release and shed? um, you know, that is the very bare basics of what shadow work is. And we usually think of it in alignment with fall, not only because of that in particular, but also because that thought of the veil being thin and the access to your ancestors, your guides, um, you being a lot closer to what's on the other side. And you can use all of that extra help to kind of help you move through those periods. So, right now, what we're seeing is that we're kind of losing some of that connection with it just being a fall thing, or
Not
when the
some
veil
of
is.
it. Not some of the connection. I haven't resonated with shadow season in years. Like I'm doing shadow work all the live long day, uh, I don't need a season for it anymore, but it's not because shadow season is no longer a thing. It's because I'm more connected on a regular
Yeah,
basis. So it's more that it's not a thing for me anymore,
yeah, and it's
except for
the same.
ghosts.
And it's the same for me, but now I'm starting to see that with other people. I'm starting to see other people who would normally kind of wait, or at least start noticing, maybe, or paying attention to the cues a little more closely during the fall season, because that's when they're expecting it to happen. That's when they're kind of, maybe quote unquote planning to do that work. So that's when they're a little more connected. That's when they're turning their attention to that kind of work. So that's really when they're picking up on it. But I'm starting to see, even in the grand collective, that more people are starting to shift to do that work. And it's happening earlier and earlier, or at multiple times during the year. And maybe they go a little bit deeper during the traditional fall season, of when had traditionally thought that shadow work is in. But I'm seeing it more spread out now, and I'm seeing more people start to recognize it. Um and and maybe they haven't spoken about it as shadow work per se.
Hmm.
But when I mention it that way, a lot of people, I'm seeing more people go, yes, yes, that is a thing that's happening. I've been dealing with that recently, and maybe I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's what it is. Um, so that's been really interesting. And another thing that she brought up, and as I was talking, they showed me the same vision that I had this morning. She kept referencing uh, snakes, and this was kind of in relation to, like, some of the other things that she was saying, not so much the time, but the shifting process, and what we're shifting into and how we're shifting into it. And the time thing was a part of it, but she was bringing up more of the disconnecting a little bit more from the thinking mind, and going into that heart space area a little bit more, and doing more of our processing through the heart, which is definitely a thing that happens during shadow season. That's definitely a part of trauma work. um, because I feel like we truly don't get to those points of reconnection with those lost parts of ourselves until we view it more from that heart space area. Um,
Well, I've
but
been
one of
crying for the last 2 days, so
That's what you were saying.
Heart space activated. I'm crying over trauma, specifically the loss of a pet that
Mm.
happened last year. But I'm also crying over missing people from my life. And I'm crying just as hard and just as often over gratitude things, which sounds so cheesy. I know. In fact, this, I'm reminded as we talk about this of a conversation I had with a friend yesterday. Yesterday? I don't know. I'm not timing well. It might have been the day before. She was talking about how a friend of hers hates the term shadow work. And I can completely understand, because when we use these terms, shadow season, shadow work, gratitude, they're eye rolling terms because they've become jargon in the spiritual community. And when something transitions from a communicative term that makes something simple to discuss among people who share that terminology, and it transitions into jargon, we just can't help but want to dismiss it because we've heard it so many times, and we all know what it means. And oh my God, if you talk about that one more time, I'm going to punch you in the neck. I get it. But at the same time, there is no other way to talk about it that automatically sort of conveys the meaning built into
True.
it. So until we have a better term, and we invite you, please,
Please.
by all means, come up with a better term than shadow work. I'm sure Jung won't mind. Um, if there's, hit us up on Instagram and maybe we'll meme it.
There you go.
That'd be a fun artwork to do for Instagram. But long story short, it is gratitude that I've been feeling. I've been very thankful. I've been spending a lot of time not in my home, but with my home.
That's
And
good.
what I mean by that is that I've been really looking around and becoming conscious of all of the beautiful things. Fuck, I'm gonna cry. Fuck you. You suck. Okay. All of the beautiful things that my mom, because this is my childhood home that I'm in, and my mom has passed, and she worked her ass off to set me up with a beautiful life. And I spent a lot of years guilty that even though she spent all that time setting me up with a beautiful life, I wasn't doing anything to maintain it. I wasn't succeeding. I didn't feel like I was succeeding with properly utilizing the leg up she gave me. And I had tons
Got
of
it.
guilt regarding that, tons of guilt. And recently, you know, regarding the term snake, which seems to be coming up a lot, I'm experiencing a very large shed of that guilt. Yeah. And that shedding of that guilt it's not going to look like, oh, wow, I no longer feel guilty. That feels so good. I noticed that I do not feel guilty. That's not what it translates to. What it translates to is an exchange. And that exchange looks more like, you know what? I really want to enhance this property. I really want to give love back to the love that was given to me. I really want to take care of and correct and improve things in my environment. I really want to utilize what's been given to me. That's the kind of gratitude that I'm talking about. I'm talking about meeting gratitude, being thankful for it, but then, you know, it goes so much further than being thankful for it. It goes into wanting to, gosh, how do I even say it? I'm feeling it, and putting it into words is so difficult. It goes past being grateful for in the traditional sense and surpasses that into wanting to foster it and help it flourish.
We to
Because
wake it up. Wake up something that's
wake it
been
up
dormant.
and expand it, because you start to realize, when you start to shed the guilt, you start to realize that that energy is still there.
So something that came up, and this is what I was trying to get to before I kind of backtracked to kind of describe what was going on, But the image that I had received this morning when she was talking about the snake and the shedding of the skin as part of this shifting energy, the thing that they showed me was what actually happens when a snake starts that process. It is not a pretty process. The first thing that happens is very traumatic. A snake goes blind. They lose their sight, or, or they lose that sense of, they don't have very strong eyesight. They start to lose some of their extra senses that help
Right.
them navigate their world as they shed. And now, you have this kind of molting process, which this thing that has been part of their protective skin is starting to come away. So they're very sensitive. They're much more sensitive to their environment and to things around them. Their senses are not keen and on point as they normally would be. So things that they would be able to naturally sense out and get a feel for and have an understanding of, that would then help them navigate the rest of their natural world, is null and void. They are kind of completely in a place of ultimate vulnerability, and it is a very scary, stressful, anxiety ridden time, but necessary in order to get to that next stage. They have outgrown the protective layer that they have had, and you have to step into that new layer. But in order to do that, you're going through this period of time that is very traumatic, that has, you know, that is just full of triggers, and they're natural. I don't know if you've ever been around a snake that is shedding. When I was 15 years old, for some reason, I bought my best friend at the time a snake for her birthday. And so I remember quite well watching this whole process happen for the first time in person, and watching the snake that I knew to be, very comfortable around people, and very comfortable with her owner and with me, because I was over a lot and handling the snake a lot. And and watching that first shed season process, and it was crazy because she struck out at everything. I mean, it was so sad to watch this poor creature that knew her environment so well be so foreign in that environment, and would, strike at the glass in her terrarium, and would, we even had to take, feeding was difficult because she couldn't sense the mice, and like normally they like live mice, and we couldn't give her live mice because the mice would kind of start to, once the mice understood that, oh, this this predator is not on its game, the mice would start like biting and things like that, and then the snake would freak out and go and coil under its rock. And it was a really crazy thing to witness. But you see this happening in the collective right now. We're all in this big shift, and we're all in a place where we are shedding old things. And it's important to remember to not only be kind to yourself, but to be kind to others, even when it seems like they are just lashing out and saying nonsensical things, and maybe, or insensitive things,
Being belligerent.
being belligerent. And it's not to make an excuse necessarily for the actions, but just to be more mindful of the fact that in this bubble, in this particular space of where a lot of us are at right now with that kind of work, we are experiencing that same kind of trauma of shedding a skin, something that's been so familiar to us for so long that, now that the cover is off, you feel very vulnerable, and it's very scary to feel that vulnerable. And I think that's something that, as we are navigating the shadow season and all of the things that are coming up with, shifting out of time and shifting into, new concepts of how to deal with things, and um how to even see our own knowledge. That was kind of another thing that she was talking about, was, you know how to see what we've accumulated a little bit differently, and maybe not leaning so much on the knowing, but leaning more into the feeling. And that is a huge part of what we're all going through collectively right now. So, like, that's kind of the nice neat summation
Right.
of everything that I watched this morning. But there are definitely ways to dive in deeper to each of those pockets.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's important that, because the one thing that was coming up as you were talking about the snake and having its senses dulled in the shed, it's important to understand that not part of the reason that you feel so vulnerable as you're shedding is because your your senses aren't being compromised as in being removed.
Hmm.
Your coping mechanisms that have taken the place of your senses are being removed.
Removed. Exactly. Exactly.
And you do not yet know how to tap in to your actual natural senses.
And
And
your
that,
actual deeper knowing, which is from the heart space, not from your brain.
well, and that's part of your natural senses,
Yeah.
I would say. It's
Yeah.
like we're all aware of our nose, our eyes, but when you are shedding through shadow work, you are shedding the old stories that you felt kept you safe but are actually keeping you from expanding. And you are headed into expansion. And it really is, it's ironic because, in a way, it's the great unknown because your conscious mind has no idea where it's headed. But in a different, in a completely opposite way, it is the only thing you should know. It is so innate, and I was thinking about this morning. It's so innate, these senses that you're going to be able to tap into as a result of discarding. Let it, oh, bass face. Why am I seeing bass face?
So what they just told me is what it actually is the great unraveling.
Exactly.
And if we put that into context, you and I, it's a lot of the things that I have personally encountered with the images of the
Massive
entangled
knot.
jewelry
Yeah.
analogy. It's the great unraveling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So all of those things that have been knotted up and have been very inconvenient and difficult to work around and work with, because so many pieces were interconnected in ways where you there was no way to find the beginning or the end in order to untangle it. It was
Mm-hmm.
too finely woven, and it wasn't something that you could just cut, because if you cut something in the wrong space, you were going to sever something that you really needed to be intact.
Right.
So the big wide mouse bass, what am I saying?
The
Wide
wide mouth
mouth
bass.
bass. Jesus Christ. That Heather just saw on the Zoom was was the realization that, unraveling of all of those very tightly woven, um, you know, pieces of ourselves that have needed, um, to be looked at again, but in a new way. And this is kind of the time for that. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's just so much is coming up. Ooh, and I see a face. Now I see
Ooh.
a Heather face.
Oh, okay. So they've been showing me part of a download that I received a few days ago. And what they had said then was that previously, when we incarnated, we planned in detail those lifetimes. And those lifetimes they likened to woven patches. Uh, Actually, what I'm seeing is, remember when you were little and you'd get those like loom pot holder kits? Someone's grandma always gave you one of those, and when you were done with the loom, it would create a pot holder, kinda, that you could theoretically use. But it was a complete patch, a woven patch, and there were no frayed edges. And they said that that's what your lifetime was. That's what your lifetimes used to look like, because the weave of that lifetime was your guide, because you were meant to be asleep. The energy supported you being asleep and having a very removed experience from unity, from source, from realizing you're part of all that is, insert spiritual mumbo jumbo here. But what they showed me in that download was that when we incarnated during this lifetime, it they showed me an unfinished piece, and that what you when you begin to awaken during this unfinished piece, the frayed edges are individual threads that all sort of taper off, and there's a transitional phase for you to be off book, so to speak. As they say in the theater, you're off book, you've learned your lines, and now you're going off book, and you're going to make up the rest of the script as you go along. They're showing me, very specifically, I felt, after my mom died, I felt a huge sense of, well, I don't know how this is going to sound, but completion. And it transitioned me into an awakening phase around 2012. And that awakening phase, as I started to lean into it, it really started to feel like I was living two lives. And the farther I got into the awakening phase of this lifetime, the more it felt like the life I had lived previously, even though it was the same timeline, it was the same lifetime, it was the same container, it felt more and more foreign. Like, I looked at the person I was, I looked at the beliefs that person held, and I could see the threads running through that woven aspect of the lifetime of who I was still. Those didn't change. But what did change was all of the 3D earth, this is how life is, these are expectations, this is what success is, this is what you do, you get married, you have babies, you do all that stuff. Those really started to crumble away. Now, I never subscribed to those ideas and ideals to begin with, but I didn't have any idea how to live outside of them. I rebelled against them, I resisted them, but I didn't create outside of them. I didn't know how to step into that energy. But so, what they were showing me while you were talking was that these these frayed edges of this weave of a lifetime are those constant threads that are you. But what you brought in with you to dismantle once you get to the fray, because of course, once you get to the fray, you start connecting with your higher self, your higher guidance, your angels, your guides, source, whatever you want, you believe is what you're working with. That's what you're connecting with at that point, instead of using the pre-woven lifetime template that you come in with. That's the transition we're making, right? And what they showed me was that once you get to that point, your work becomes, like you were saying, unweaving. all of that,
Mhm.
and what you came into this particular lifetime knowing that it was going to be the beginning, the burgeoning of that awakening for humanity. Being in the lead meant that you created a lifetime that was made of all the triggers that you had yet to heal from every other lifetime. And instead of doing a master class on that one trigger like you had in lifetimes before, you had all the triggers. You had all the things. You had all the traumas and abuses. And so if you're thinking to yourself, this is a shit show, why is my life such a goddamn dumpster fire? This is why.
Yeah.
Because the work of awakening means you have to unweave everything that's left so that you can transition. And this is what Ann Tucker was talking about a couple weeks back,
Yeah.
transition into Dharma.
And this is the time that you get to create your original artwork.
Yes.
This is
And
your
this is the time you have to
you
create
have to.
your original artwork. But the problem is that we're so removed from being artists on this plane in this dimension that we have no clue how to even begin. It's like you start with, when you're a baby, you start learning to walk and talk and do things for yourself. But it's been so long since we were babies that we really have forgotten how we didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And how do you conceive of not knowing anything when you've been on the planet for decades at this point?
Yeah.
And that's really what's happening when you get into the frayed edges of that weave that you came in with, because you've done enough work to be able to see through and around the trauma that previously blocked your vision and made the illusion look so real. When you start to dismantle that illusion, there's nothing at first to take its place,
Yeah.
and it's scary as hell.
Well, and it just seems daunting because, again, you've been here a while. You've been doing the things. You've lived through a lot. And the thought of I'm going to start over again, because essentially that is what's happening. Maybe not as all dramatic as starting completely over again, but in a way you are, because you're stepping into a different version of yourself, a version that is more trusting of itself. And that's definitely something that we have been conditioned not to do. We have all been conditioned not to trust our inner knowing, not to trust our heart, not to trust, you know, the very inner burning and desires that lead us to amazingness.
Right. Don't trust your passion. Don't trust your instinct. Don't trust your gut. You'll
Are
fail
you
if you
sure?
don't.
Are
Right.
you sure about
But you'll
that?
need a backup. You'll just need a backup. We have been conditioned to believe that failure is imminent and inevitable, and that if we don't trust in the systems that were put in place to help humanity and the collective, that we will die, or
And
worse, we will suffer huge
yeah,
consequences that we're not prepared for.
and we're spreading ourselves so thin in the process, and this is what leads to burnout, and this is what leads to, all of these breakdowns and thoughts of like, oh, but I haven't made it yet. I haven't checked off everything on the list yet, or that 5-year plan that I created is a piece of shit, and I haven't checked off anything on that list. We're putting so much pressure on ourselves without realizing, how could you possibly achieve any of those things when you are spreading yourself so thin that you don't have enough energy to put towards any one thing, to the point where you can actually achieve that thing. We want to
And
throw everything out so quickly. It's like, oh my God, I tried it once and it didn't happen.
okay,
Then
but
I
there's
have
a
to find a new
reason.
way.
But there's a reason, and it's so
Sure.
important that I'm just tapping into. I was kind of tapping into it last night as I was, I had time to myself. No one was here, and it was dark, and I was outside in the pool, just bobbing around like a harbor seal and looking up at the stars and talking to my guides. That's what my night looked like last night. And I was, listing the things that I was grateful for, but really feeling into it. And when you were talking just now, I realized that part of the reason we don't allow ourselves any time to actually manifest things is because of this conditioning that tells us time is not on our side. We go in with a perception that we're already out of time. And I remember when I was younger, from very early, if not the beginning of this life, all the way into my late to mid 20s, I'd say, I had a huge fear of running out of time. And I didn't know where it came from. I didn't understand it. It didn't really make any logical sense to me. I just remember always feeling I was too late. I had missed the boat. I was never going to be able to do it now because I was too old. Like, I was 19 and I was too old. And I realize now that that mindset is instilled in us from such an early age that our parents are constantly worried they're not going to have enough, they're not going to be enough, they're not going to make enough, they're not going to get recognized enough, they're not going to be given enough. And that's the thing, is that the disempowerment narrative goes all the way back, because our parents come by it through not just their lifetime, but their parents' lifetime, and those parents' lifetime, and great, go back as many greats as you want. There is this overarching theme of there won't be enough. That feast will not last, and it will be famine.
So, something else that just popped up for me as you were talking, and this is how this goes. So, if you're just catching us for the first time and you're like, how is this working? Like, I don't understand this conversation that's happening between these two. This is how this happens.
Yeah.
We can get on the air not knowing what in the hell we're going to talk about. And 5 seconds into the show, all of a sudden everything clicks and comes
Right.
together. And this is why we do this, because
We're
this
like
is
we're two prongs on a plug.
we are Wonder Twin powers activate is what we are. And so what they kind of pinged me with was, we have this knowledge of when we were younger, we soaked up so much so fast. Like, there was a lot of shit we learned in a very condensed amount of time, relatively. And if you think about it, it's like, well, no shit, because we didn't have all of those other distractions. It was easy to pick something up like a language, or how to walk, or how to run, or how to navigate society. Yeah, because we didn't have all of those presets kind of ingrained in us yet. That took a while to happen. So now it's a matter of thinking, well, yeah, duh. Like, that's literally what we were just talking about. We have slowly been putting ourselves through some sort of crazy Houdini magic trick of, like, putting on a straitjacket and, like, chaining ourselves to a cage underwater with, and
Upside
hiding the
down.
keys upside down, hiding the keys, all the things. And now when we struggle to get free from that, if it doesn't happen within 30 seconds, we're like, that's it, we failed, we die.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not how that
The
works,
lion got me.
though.
The lion got me. I knew the lion was going to get me. I always knew the lion was going to get me.
I'm such a bad magician. I can't do anything.
I suck at
I
life.
suck at life. But
While you were talking, they said something to me. They said your inner child is your inner power.
oh, hell yeah.
That's
Thousand
why it's
percent.
so important to heal those younger aspects of you because they're imprisoned in that trauma. And when you start to crack the shell of that trauma and you start to remove that pain, they are able to unite these inner child aspects. And the more inner child aspects that unite, the stronger the will becomes of the child. And the will of the child expedites the process. And on top of expediting the process, you need what you had as a child and lost oh no, that's where that time, I don't want to talk about that, it's gonna make me cry. Oh man.
Talk about
All
it.
right.
Talk about it. Talk about
Oh
it. Talk about it.
fuck, all right. Whew. Okay, so finishing what I was saying, unlocking those aspects of your inner child, they unite, they become stronger, and they become an overpowering presence within you, and they interact with this 3D world completely differently than you have been reacting to it. They wanted me to say reacting. You haven't been interacting, you have been reacting.
Reacting.
A child
Most definitely.
interacts and an adult reacts. And so what you're doing is wow, they're on fire today. What you're doing is you're healing all of those fragments to come back together so that there's enough of you, of your essence, to tap into interaction, which is how you manifest rather than reaction. And they started this little lesson several weeks back when they gave me a download that, as all downloads do, it came out of nowhere. But when I say it came out of nowhere, I mean I wasn't thinking of anything in the realm of this. They started by showing me an instance where I was 11 or 12, and I was with my mom at a restaurant. And the restaurant had this neat ceiling fan, like kind of a old timey, maybe 1800s sort of ceiling fan setup. And it had, belts between the fans. It was just really cool to look at. But of course, I was at that, tween stage where I was like, everything's uncool and it's not cool to think something's cool. And so we were sitting in the booth that had the high backs, and we were having like a mother-daughter lunch or something. And she was looking up at the ceiling fans and she was kind of marveling. And it was this childlike marveling that made me incredibly uncomfortable. And I remember her saying to me, oh, Heather, look at the ceiling fans. Aren't they amazing? They're just so great. And I was like, okay, whatever. Like, I'm too cool to really recognize. But the reason they showed me that is because I realized, looking back at that 11-year-old who was sitting there, that my mom's childlike appreciation represented an abandonment and a vulnerability to her inner child that I no longer felt safe having in myself. So I had to deflect the energy she was sending to me by being a stink face about it. And that helped me feel protected. I could have never told you at the time what I was protecting myself against. I literally viewed it as, I'm too cool for school. And if I really was too cool for school, I wouldn't be using that terminology. So that shows you how far I've come. Anyway, what they said was that there's this transition. It's just another part of the shadow and light cycle that happens as we come here and incarnate on this planet. When we start to transition, and when, for those of you out there who have children, this is going to be an important little nugget. When we start to transition from a space of being in the moment as you are when you're a child and interacting with your environment freely and with that sense of vulnerability and abandon, you don't even feel vulnerable. You don't know you're being vulnerable. You don't know enough yet to know the difference between vulnerability and invulnerability. But when you start to transition into your teen years, what happens is that you start noticing your environment more, and you start taking on the woes and views of your parents. And your parents inevitably have taught you to be fearful because they're fearful. They're fearful of not having enough. Not enough money. How are we going to pay that bill? How are we going to afford her school? How are we going to make sure she doesn't get attacked? How are we going to make sure that, she's growing up properly? Does she look like she's gaining weight? They're hyper focused on their external environment, so you start to learn that you need to be hyper focused on your external environment, and that external environment starts to become a very scary place, and you start to perhaps get resentful. Maybe you dive in consciously all the way, but there's always going to be a part of you, and the trauma seed is that you are taught to guard so deeply that inner child that you just start from that point layering and layering and layering on protection levels. And when you start to protect that inner child like that, it's a process that doesn't stop until you get to the point where you feel it's necessary to break away from your parents and strike out on your own. And what you're unconscious of, 9 times out of 10, when you go to strike out on your own, is that there's a hope deeply, deeply, deeply embedded in you, coming from pinging from that inner child that's been so buried under all those protective layers that they can hardly breathe. They're still alive somehow, but they can hardly breathe. And the hope is that when you break free from your parents and all the bullshit expectations that they've heaped on you, that you will strike out on your own and uncover that inner child that used to so freely interact and manifest in its environment. And the way that this tends to display itself most prominently, at least in the eyes of the parents that are seeing it, and maybe it's just because maybe I'm seeing this from my point of view because that's how it happened for me. When I got a boyfriend, I really, really was like, okay, I can't let anyone, no one's going to give me a curfew. No one's going to tell me where to go. I'm old enough now. If I can have a boyfriend, then I'm old enough to make my own decisions. But the real agenda underneath that is that when you first get a boyfriend, that boyfriend is also looking to uncover their inner child. And an unspoken contract occurs between the two of you because you're both in that energetic space of wanting to uncover your inner children. And what that manifests as is if you support me behaving like a kid, I'll support you behaving like a kid. And then you go and you try to have a relationship based on this unspoken contract, and things start to turn sour. Why are things starting to turn sour? Well, because the programming is so deeply embedded, and it actually, you're already taught to delve into that external environment, and the external environment gives you a feedback that says you need to please me in order to survive. And you realize that the only way to please your external environment, because it's your master, is to do its bidding. And that doesn't leave any time for that unspoken contract. So you start to resent the person you're with for acting like a child, and you don't want to support them anymore. And I think this happens more from females to males than males to females.
Well, yeah, because we are the emotional side
Yeah.
of the coin. The divine feminine is very much the holder of the emotion and the feeling, and the divine masculine is very much the seeding energy, the planting energy, the taking the thing and building and creating and making it a reality,
Mm-hmm.
the thought or the feeling.
And so ultimately, what happens is you start to resent that person that you're with because while they're supporting you being a child, so they're fun to have fun with, they're fun to go on dates with, they're fun to go on road trips with, they're fun, fun, fun. But if you ventured more deeply into a relationship, you start to think with the adult brain, and the adult brain wants to protect. And the way you protect is to make sure, are they viable? Are they working? Do they pay their bills on time? And if that person doesn't fit that side of the equation, which, by the way, with such a deep rift between the two sides, That's why it feels like a big fake out. That's why it feels like the bait and switch when you're in a relationship, because you go in thinking, oh, thank God my inner child can finally breathe and expand. This is a safe space because this person has an energy that speaks to my subconscious that tells me it is okay to interact with my environment. And interacting with your environment looks like what? It looks like play. This person is fun to play with. But then the old programmings come in, and this is where the battle begins, and you recognize it as looking like maturity, quote unquote, and you mature yourself right out of relationship after relationship because the person you've chosen supports your inner child's need to play but doesn't support the adult's need for safety, security, and maturity.
Well, and ultimately that is the what we're carrying and what we're fostering, really what we're carrying, like we're carrying around a suitcase, is that, like, that emotional baggage that we're speaking of is that karma, the ancestral karma that we are breaking free from.
Yeah.
The not only decades but generations of this programming being passed down, not just figuratively but in actuality in our DNA,
Yeah. Yeah.
from generation to generation to generation. This That is the period that we're currently starting to break out of, and it is not pretty as it's happening, because that's a lot of mess to deconstruct.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that we're replacing it with feels like it's not safe, and feels like we're not going to have anything, and like we're not going to be stable because we're not hyper focused on it, when being hyper focused on it doesn't help us get any of those things either.
Never has.
It never
Not
has.
not in a healthy way anyway. For
Well,
some
no,
people, for some people, hyperfocus works to get them all of the material goods they could ever want in life. But
but that
hyperfocus
doesn't make
is
them happy.
no, exactly. Hyperfocus is a barrier to happiness.
Yeah.
Just like everything the old programs and systems and beliefs require of you is actually a barrier to happiness. And so what you end up with is you end up with a suitcase that holds your inner child full of trauma, that it's, she's in there really small and curled up in the fetal position, terrified, wrapped up in blankets of trauma. And then you've got a suitcase full of new old paradigms and programs and beliefs, all of these stories, and that's your safety suitcase. And the two, boom, 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 you can try and combine them as much as you want, and they're just going to bounce right off of each other because those suitcases are hard and there's no way to combine them. And so when you start to awaken, there is a very slow crawl to unfurling and an energy of exchange between the suitcases, as if you put both suitcases down, opened them up, and decided, I'm going to combine both of these contents, both the contents of both of these suitcases, into one suitcase.
It's more like you're the Griswolds on vacation with all your luggage on the top of the station wagon, and you've just come to a hard stop in the middle of the fucking desert, and all of your luggage has gone flying off the roof of the station wagon. It's strewn out all over the highway, and it's being blown away in the dust devil that's just come in. And that's all of your clothes, that's all of your shoes, that's all of your toiletries, that's all of your traveler's checks and your credit cards, and all of the things are blowing away, and you can't run after them fast enough. And now all of a sudden it's like you have nothing. But the only nothing that you are actually handling is all of the construct is going away. All of the things that you have built up in your mind as this is what it means to be secure. This is what it means to be successful. This is what it means to have accomplished something. I worked for these clothes. I spent 3 months putting aside, this much of my money every week so that I could have this luggage and go on this vacation. And now all of it is strewn all over the desert. And what you're actually getting is a fresh start without the paradigms. But that feels scary. That feels like the snake losing its skin
Yeah.
and not having any bearing of where anything is. And all of a sudden, you have to turn inwards and trust what's in your heart to actually guide you to the thing that is the real success, which is your passion, your desire, your compassion, your gratitude, your real inner knowing of not only yourself and the people that are around you, but also of your environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's big. That's a lot
Yeah.
to wrap your head around. And so yeah, you got to be gentle, man, and
Well,
expect
and
that.
you got to do the one thing that you're trained not to do. You got
Yeah,
to give it time.
you got to give it time. Like, I'm going through my own version of this right now.
Mm-hmm.
I worked my ass off to get through the general schooling portion of my college, having started that process at 40 because I couldn't my family situation was such that at the time that I was graduating from high school, my family was losing the house that they had built, that they had poured all of their money, all of their hard work into, because a business deal that they had entered went south and basically completely ripped the rug underneath them. And so we were, finding a house to rent, and I was very much involved in that whole process. So I was trying to help my family start my life, as in just supporting myself, so finding a job, and did not get to immediately go into that college experience, which is something that I had actually looked forward to. But like, my parents never set aside money for me. That was never, they were never kind of in a position or even in a mindset to do that because they never went to college. Um, and so it wasn't something that they were necessarily thinking about, even though that's something that I had voiced that I wanted to do. And I was very much a a lover of knowledge and wanting to do those sort of things. They didn't recognize that, and then this happened, and then that's kind of the trajectory that I had taken. And then I had at an early age found what I thought was going to be my quote unquote career that lasted basically 17 years, and then that went away. And then I decided to go back to school at the age of 40 and have been very slowly and consistently working my way towards that goal and really enjoying it, because a lot of that work had also spurred on or been in conjunction with or helped to bring about new stages of my spiritual growth as well. My classes always very much went in tandem with the things that I was learning spiritually, which was always really helpful and I really enjoyed. But last year, I got my general ed out of the way, came away with 4 associate's degrees, got into the school that I had always wanted to get into a program that seemed perfect. And then a few weeks ago, as we were getting closer to the beginning of the fall semester starting, I realized that my financial aid hadn't come through yet. And so I was, on the financial aid department, like, what the hell's going on? Like, I don't understand why nothing's happening or nothing's going anywhere. And it seemed like every week the answer was, oh, there's something that you have to go and correct on your paperwork. Just go correct that, send it back to us, and then, we'll get it out by the end of the week. You'll see something by the end of the week. That went on for over a month. And 2 weeks ago, basically, I figured out, or I was notified that I wasn't getting any financial aid. There, one pocket I had already received all that I was going to get, and then I was not eligible for the other pocket that would have been available, and with really no explanation why. But I mean, I had 3 days before a rather large payment was due, and there was no way that I could make it. And so I had to withdraw from classes for fall. That sucked so hard. And I'm still kind of like trying not to get too down about it, because I know that all of this other stuff is going on in the background. So I have somewhat of a clearer understanding that if it's not happening now, it's because there are other things that need to happen now.
Mm-hmm.
And in large part, I am okay with that, but there are still other things attached to not being able to move forward with that are really hard. And so, it's like trying to be okay with, and not just be okay with, but really allowing that particular piece to go away for the moment, or forever how long it needs to go away for,
Mm-hmm.
and sitting in the space of, okay, if that is not the thing right now, then that means that something else is the thing right now. And being open enough and not so consumed by the sadness, the anger, the hurt of that situation that I am blocking what needs to come to me right now. What the pocket that I need to be sitting in right now, or that is going to be more beneficial for me to sit in right now. Um, that's a tough thing to wrap your head around. And I know a lot of people are going through some version of that, where there's either something that they worked very hard for, or something that they were very driven about and set on and working towards and working really hard towards, and making progress with. And then you get to a point and all of a sudden it's like, "Er." And even Anne talked about that in one of her in one of the three shows that I watched today. She was talking about a big event that she kept trying to put together, and had been working really hard towards it, had put a lot of time and effort into it, had put a lot of energy into it. And then things, when it actually came down to like starting to put things in place and actually making it a reality, it was like roadblock after roadblock, and she couldn't do it. And what ended up happening is that that was right before the pandemic hit. And she was like, I wouldn't have been able to have this event anyway. And then it would have been a super bum out, because I would have put all of that extra time and effort into it and gotten everything together, and people would have, RSVP'd and paid for it. And then I would have been left with the mess of having to go back and, refund everybody and refund the vendors and reschedule and all of that mess. She's like, I was devastated for a short period of time until I realized, oh, that's why. And so, I don't have knowledge of the oh that's why yet.
Right.
But I know that there is something, that there has to be something. Otherwise, it would have happened. Something would have fallen into place and I would have been able to just, breeze through it anyway, even without the financial aid being a thing. And again, thinking about how far I've come, because you have to celebrate, you really do need, not have to, you really do need to, for your own sanity, for your own heart, for your future, for your, healthy mental state, you really should take those wins, those small wins of, and trust me, they're not as small as you conceive of them as. All of those things that you put into place to get to the point that you got to, even if the plan didn't work out the way you expected it to, that doesn't negate all of that. Like, I'm being very careful to not negate all of the work that I did, even though I've had moments where I have said it out loud and been like, but I worked so hard, and it was all for nothing, and I wasted time. And there was no waste of time. This was, like I said, very intertwined with my spiritual work. And there's no way that I would give up all that I have learned, all that I've accumulated, all that I've been able to share with other people and help them along their path as well. I wouldn't go back and do that just to save myself a little heartbreak for a brief moment of time.
Mhm.
It's, I know that I will get past where I am now. It still hurts and I'm still trying to nurture myself through that. But, I I know that that will lead to something else. And I
Mhm.
think Heather has something to add to
I
that.
do. The visual that was forming as you were speaking was that of a really large jigsaw puzzle.
Mhm.
And it has some places that are all assembled and you can see the full picture, and then it has holes in it, just holes. And they said you have got to stop thinking of the unfolding as this linear line. We get into the mindset where we've set a goal, and if we do not achieve the goal we set, we are stuck in that mindset. And it narrows our focus to the point where we've done all of this stuff to what end? The goal has vanished. It's disintegrated. It's disappeared. It's been taken away. Whatever the case may be. And they're like, you have to start seeing this as a giant jigsaw puzzle. And sometimes you've got to stop working on one area because you're too hyper focused, and you've got to jump to another area because the energies have aligned in favor of assembling more pieces there. And we're always referring to downloads and to these little, breadcrumb trails that we try to follow. We're always referring to them as the puzzle pieces. And the puzzle pieces never come in linear. Not ever. There's never a time when we've received a download so complete that it instantly heals one part of us and instantly opens the gateway to unlocking the success in a specified goal. That's not how this has ever worked. It's not how it will ever work. You have got to believe that you're here to put all of the pieces into the puzzle.
It's not how puzzles work, period. You have never ever opened up a puzzle and, puzzles don't necessarily read from left to right or up to down. You've never started in a corner and have gone, you know, this piece and then the piece next to it and then the piece next to that and then the piece next to that and started row by row and
Right.
filled in a puzzle.
That's not
You
even how
know,
paint by numbers works. And that has, numbered sections.
you try to find the corners and then on your way to find the corners you find a piece that you're like, oh, that matches this piece, I think, and then you try to put it in there and then yes, that matches, and then you pick up another piece and you're like, oh, I think this one goes over on this side, and they're opposite ends from each other. You eventually fill it all in.
Right.
But and that is, again, one of those tools that we have given ourselves to help show us that particular lesson. These things exist in the physical on this planet to help us grasp those kind of ideas better.
Hmm.
Something that we can then later look back and validate and go, of course, a puzzle doesn't work that way.
Right.
We've been doing this since we were yay high, also, and that's never been the way that it works. So, why would we expect the rest of life to work that way? Well, because that's what was passed down to us, but it didn't work for them either. And that's
Nope.
the other thing that's so funny is like, and that's, we don't often have those kinds of really honest conversations with our family. Our family passes down what they want for us, what they would hope and wish for us, not the practical lessons of what they've actually experienced and been through. You only see, for the most part, most people don't see all the crap that goes underneath. You see the kind of washed over, kind of shinier, polished up version of the absolute, turd of an experience that they went
Well,
through.
I'd say that that's what social media promotes.
And and it
My
does.
family, I've seen the turd. In fact, that's where all my trauma comes from, is just nothing but turds. But on social media, you see the polished up turd.
No, but like even in my family, even with all of the things that I experienced, and I knew a lot of what was happening, nobody ever actually talked about it. So although you saw the thing happening, like I didn't know and understand, I felt, but didn't have that kind of conversation of understanding of what my parents were going through really when all of those things were happening, when they were losing their house, when the business deal went south, like I saw the after effects of that, and I saw the well, let's pick up the pieces and move along sort of,
Bootstraps.
but I didn't get to, I wasn't privy to, the conversations that I'm sure my mom and dad had, like on their way to the grocery store or something, when I wasn't around, or in their business shop when I wasn't around. I'm sure there were other things that were happening that would have clued me in to, maybe they don't have everything kind of. Well, although I knew they didn't have everything figured out, but it just seemed like there was always some sort of like you had mentioned before, there was some sort of fallback. There was some sort of, well, we have a plan B and we have a plan C. And it just felt like, even though in reality they were probably making that up on the fly, hell, I probably made up plan C and D and E for them.
Right.
And we have used some of those plans. I know this. Um, but I don't think I fully understood at the time, um, that wasn't truly something that was fully fleshed out or figured out, or they didn't know if that was going to work. Like my dad is very much one of those people that's like, he wants to be a positive thinker in that particular way of, if he puts his mind to it, he can accomplish it. And it does it occasionally work out in his favor? Technically, yes, sometimes. But there's also something happening underneath that he never deals with, which is a whole different set of trauma that he creates, and a whole different set of emotional baggage that gets created not only in himself but with the other family members, that spilled over to my mom, to myself, to my brother, of just, you know, my dad having this, well, it's going to work because it's going to work because I said so. And that kind of, forcing it kind of puts everybody else in a position where they're like, well, this has to work. And we have to bend over backwards doing everything that we can to make it work because dad said it has to work or it's going to work and is not backing down from this. There was no other option, but the options that he decided were okay to put in place and they were going to be followed, damn it. And it was going to work out, damn it. And what it really meant was that everybody else around him is going to bend themselves into pretzels, making sure that it happened. But in the meanwhile, you're creating a bucket of trauma over to the side here that you're not addressing that is going to show up somewhere. And I certainly know that it's shown up multiple times in my life because now every time I have gotten to a point of like my life exploding, the immediate reaction is, this is the plan that's going to work and this is the thing that's going to happen next and we're going to go after it and it's going to happen and it's got to work because come on, let's get it together, let's get our poop in a group, peeps, let's do this and let's move forward.
Our poop in a group?
Poop in a group. You've never heard that term before?
No, I have not.
You've never heard anybody say get your poop in a group?
Absolutely not.
Well, you are lacking.
Oh, clearly.
But you know what I mean? It's like you think that you're doing the right thing because this is kind of the template that's been set before you. These are the experiences you've had. You've lived through those experiences. You've gotten over, you've come through them. You've gotten to a particular portion of, stability, or you feel like you've moved through them successfully. And in reality, what you've done is you've created or perpetuated this particular trauma cycle that you will keep triggering over and over again until you learn to release it and just let the universe hand you what it needs to hand you. Like, I'm very, sometimes I think about it, and although I don't want to dwell on it, I think about, well, what would have happened if we wouldn't have pushed so hard in that particular direction to make that situation have that particular outcome? Like, what would that have actually led us to? Like, what did we stop unknowingly? What sort of amazing, life change and beautiful manifestation did we squash or nip in the bud, so to speak, because there was this grand plan that was set before us for whatever reason, and that's what was followed instead. And we had to scratch and claw and basically make ourselves miserable trying to reach something that was really not any place that we really wanted to be. It was just a false sense of stability that we had bought into, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you think about that and it's like, dang.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, as you were getting to that beautiful conclusion, they said this in my head: manifestation does not live at the end of the road you choose to travel. Manifestation lives in the detours you ignored along the way.
Ooh, that should be a greeting card or a t-shirt or a
Right?
bumper sticker or something. What?
Hallmark just jump into my brain? What is
More
happening?
like K House, but like
It's ours now, baby. Proof is right here.
right?
Copyright
Copyright,
2022 using
trademark.
our inside voice.
We own that shit. Wow. Beautifully put.
Yeah,
Beautifully
I don't know
put.
who's
It
talking to
is,
me today, but they are a poet.
they are on point. Yeah. but that's, that's absolutely it. And that's part of this shifting and this evolution that we're kind of just in the midst of. I we're just starting to learn how to, you know, maybe release a little bit and just take those leaps of faith, really, and, you know, get up out of the nest and learn how to fly without knowing anything that's going, not knowing the outcome is probably one of our biggest stresses, but we kind of put that stress on ourselves. We created that. Yeah, from just what we've learned, what we've been indoctrinated into. It's interesting to kind of be that, and don't you see those people who are like the fly by the seat of their pants type of people, and it all just always seems that everything works out for them, and you're like, fuck you,
Yeah, all
nothing's
the time.
ever that easy for me. Like, how did you just up and do that thing? Like, it, oh my god, it used to drive me crazy. So a very good friend of mine, um always had this thing. When we were teenagers, we go shopping together, and it just seemed like at every turn we could pick up the same item in the same store at the same time, and her shit would be on sale and mine wouldn't. In the same day, we bought like two or three different CDs that were the same CD from the same place, and every time she went to the counter, it cost less for her than it did for me. And I'm like, you bitch. Why though? And then we were buying fair gear, and we went to go get sleeping bags, and we were at the
Ren
Big
Fair.
Five. Yes, Ren Fair. And we were buying sleeping bags at the Big Five. We both chose the same sleeping bag, and hers was 50% off. I'm like, it's the same fucking bag. And I think like hers had like a rip in the nylon somewhere or something, which who gives a flying fuck? I didn't care. I was going to put blankets over that shit. I didn't care what it looked like. I just wanted to be warm. And I'm like, why though? Why is it always better for you than it is for me? It drove me nuts. But she was also never, like, and if I think about the time, this is during the kind of beginning of that time when my parents were starting to go through the turmoil of the things with the business deal going haywire. And so I'm hyper focused on how much money am I spending? I'm hyper focused on how much money I'm spending, and I'm, trying to like drill down to the last penny how much I have to spend. And she's not thinking about any of that. All she's thinking about is, oh, this looks nice. This is the thing that I want. I like this color. This should keep me warm. Or, yeah, this is the CD I wanted. I don't care if it's used. She gives zero shits about any of those fine details. And so all of this stuff is just kind of falling into her lap because she's not trying to control it with an iron fist. She doesn't have uh, you know, this horrible grip hanging on to these particular outcomes so tightly. And man, did I. I was wound so tight at that age.
Was.
I was, I've, and I had been that wound up that tight pretty much most of my life. And I am a lot better now. I'm still wound pretty
If
tight.
that gives you an idea of the starting point.
And if I had a little clip from Ferris Bueller right now to interject into this is where that little
Oh,
sound
you are
bite would go.
Cameron. You are Cameron.
I've I That was literally one of my nicknames. Yes. In fact, like, I used to do the bit with my with my best friend in high school of the that she'll keep calling me. She'll keep calling me if I don't go. Like, and I was always sick. So that was another thing that I had in common with Cameron. And I never felt like anything was fun or like I had ever seen anything good because I was always too stressed about everything.
Yep.
And very much definitely, I always felt like my dad loved his car more than he loved me because my dad also had a car that he was very, very fond of. And even though I know that that's not true, there was a good portion of my life where I'm like, he totally loves that car more than he loves me. In fact, he almost named me after the car. I was very close. Had I been a boy, I would have been named Shelby Cobra after his favorite car.
Oh my god. What? No.
Yeah. So yes, that is absolutely where I would have been
Oh
inserting.
my god. Can you imagine going around, especially after Karate Kid, with a name like Shelby Cobra?
That would have been hard in the 80s, man. And
Oh my
everybody I tell
god.
that to is like, well, Shelby could have been a girl's name. Like, I've heard of like girls named Shelby. The Shelby is a cool name. I could see you being a Shelby. And I'm like, no,
No,
no, no. The
absolutely not.
the 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 other two the two names that were the alternate names were the Shelby Cobra, had I been a boy,
Yeah.
and the alternate the alternate girl name that's actually written down in my baby book, so I know this is the God's honest truth, was Misty Dawn.
Dear Christ. Your parents aren't even hippies. What is happening
No,
there?
I would have been a stripper instead.
Oh, no.
Instead, I am very grateful to have been named
Oh,
after the
gosh.
Bionic Woman. So,
Oh my god. Oh
but
my
yeah.
god. Mm.
So, okay,
Jesus.
your turn to talk.
How do you recover after that? Shelby Cobra and Misty Dawn. I feel other things are unfolding beyond my control, and the conversation has left no place for me, and I
It's
don't know
taken a
what to do.
turn. It's taken a turn.
It has taken it's drifted like Tokyo. It's man, whoo. Okay, I will say that while you were revealing that horrifying account of your childhood, um, after I said a few minutes ago, after I said, I don't know who's speaking to me, but whoever they are, they're a poet. Oh my God, something went through me. The tears, the heat, the chills from head to toe, just like a wave just washed through me. Like whatever was talking to me was like, here I am, and entered my body. I haven't had this happen in a really long time. And because I had to stay, abreast of the conversation, I really didn't have time to explore whoever the fuck that was. But wow, that was a crazy experience. I had muted my mic so that I could hyperventilate a little bit, and the flappy hands and the rubby fingers and the tears and the whole 9 yards. I haven't had that happen in so long. So whoever it is, it wasn't just me. Usually it's me reaching up into the cloud and pulling some, plucking out whatever someone's going to hand me, almost like a carnival game. But this time it was literally someone was like, oh, I'm here to talk through you. And then when I realized they were talking through me, they were like, and enter. Here I am. And I was like, no, not right now. So maybe more will unfold with whatever guide I've tapped into or has tapped into me, because that was a very almost unsettling feeling. I mean, it was unsettling, but not in a terrible way. But it was almost uncomfortably unsettling.
A surprising takeover, if you
A
will.
very surprising takeover. Seriously, I haven't experienced a takeover like that since my dad jumped me at his sister's 50th wedding anniversary party.
Nice going, Dad.
Oh, well, dad got yelled at for that one. He didn't mean to jump me. It's funny because this story came to mind last time we were recording, but it had no place in what we were recording. And I kind of wondered why it came up. And now it makes sense because they were like, hey, heads up, you're going to get jumped. Hey, by the way, you might get jumped. But the story behind my dad showing up was I was at a surprise party for my aunt and uncle's 50th. I think it was their 50th wedding anniversary. And when they got there, a sort of reception line formed that I found myself in. And I was like, oh, is this what we're doing? Okay. And I was sort of at the tail end of it. And I was fine when they showed up. I was, applauding with everybody while they were walking in and, oh, this is so sweet. And then all of a sudden I felt that familiar choke of tears, like I was getting some sort of psychic hit. And then before I knew it, literally, it was as if my dad's spirit had come charging from behind, ran through my back, hit my front, and was in firmly ensconced in my body. And by the time my aunt got to me to say thank you for coming, I was drenched with tears. My eyes were red and puffy, and all I could say was, Dad's really happy to be here. And she looked at me like, what is happening? Okay, well, thanks for coming. And then she moved on. She did not know what to do with me. I didn't know what to do with me. And after that, I was like, look, I know you wanted to speak to your sister, but that was incredibly unfair. Don't you ever do that to me again. He was like, sorry, I did not realize that I was going to do that. That was not my intention. I was going to stand behind you and tell her what to say to me. And I was like, that sucked. He was like, I'll never do it again. I promise.
That totally made me tear up.
Good. I'm glad I'm not the only one. I was bawling. He
Stinker.
wanted he wanted to get a message to his sister so bad. He jumped me and it was almost like a scene out of, I mean, I've never seen the movie through, but I feel like it was a scene out of Ghost. Like I felt like Whoopi Goldberg getting jumped and suddenly not behaving like myself. And I had never experienced that before. In all our ghost investigations, well, save for one, that had not happened. But when it happened on the ghost investigation, it was so subtle, I didn't realize what was happening. That was the difference. But when my dad did it, he was like, my sister. And he like, boom, like lightning. And it just, you could feel the physically energetic push of energy into the body.
See, and that's what I think happened with my grandmother, only when it happened, I was only 2 when it initially happened. So I didn't know what the hell that was
Mm-hmm.
and didn't know how to react to it. And then she just kind of stuck around for 43 years.
Because she didn't know how to get back out.
I don't think she realized that she had
Stuck around.
that that she had jumped in with such gusto and
Right.
had like set up camp.
Right.
I think she thought she was just kind of like hanging out over here behind my shoulder, and it's
Adjacent.
like,
She was adjacent to her granddaughter, which is
no,
exactly where she wanted to be, but no, she was actually
tethered,
within.
completely tethered, and within, and it was very funny because now the thing the the thing that we talked about previous is going to show up somewhere else later, um where I kind of explained this whole situation. But the short of it is, I later on had a very profound spiritual experience, and during that experience there was very definitely a uncoupling that was very much not just kind of ceremonial in nature, um, but a very definite like feeling of, whew, I am free of being tethered in that way. Like she is still very much hanging out around me and checking in, and I still have, all of the fun knowledge that she had imparted me with, but yeah, she's no longer uh
a
quite
part
so
of you.
joined. We're not joined at the hip anymore.
So I just got a hit, and I feel like there's a conversation coming as we get more deeply ensconced in quote shadow season, about entity attachment, because what they just told me was the difference between someone who has entity attachments versus someone who doesn't is a depth of knowledge of their own energy. And
Oh,
I've
sure.
never, right? I've never really looked into entity attachment. It's something that is very popular in the QHHT, past life regression, spiritual community, but it's not something I've ever felt incredibly concerned with, or it's not something I've been called to really look deeply into until this very moment. And I don't know how deep the dive will be there because honestly, now that we've gone through a couple of instances where we've both experienced it, I think the conversation, there's a door that's open to having that conversation. But before today, I didn't know where I stood on the spectrum of entity attachment and spirit attachment, that sort of thing. It's kind of murky waters in my mind in terms
Sure.
of conscious knowledge of it. But the reason they told me, the reason it's murky waters for me is because I know my own energy. So when my dad jumped me, it felt like I was being jumped. I could tell that someone was entering me, and I was like, the fuck, you're not, and I pushed him out as soon as I could. And they're like, that's an important difference. So I feel like that's something that people are going to want to hear us talk about. I'm no expert, gonna say it up front.
Well, I would be an excellent study for that particular case because I can tell you very firmly that one of my own kind of clues to what was happening with or what had happened between my grandmother and I finally realizing what had happened was that I kind of had no sense of myself. I had no sense of my wants, my desires, my like what would make you happy. Like
Mm.
we had these conversations where it was like, well, you need to find out what would make you happy. And I'm like, I don't know. And it's like, well, how what do you mean you don't know? Or like, or what do you want? And I'm like, I don't know what I want. It's like, how can
And
you
it
not know
wasn't
what you want?
and it wasn't just I don't know what I want. It was
Like, I had no
anxiety
concept.
building. Well, it was anxiety building, then panic attack, then complete shutdown and resistance. Then
Hmm.
I don't know what I want. And it wasn't just I don't know what I want in terms of saying I don't know what I want. It's I don't know how to want.
Hmm.
And that they're saying is a huge tie-in to entity attachment.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, huge, of course. Like, and
And
now it's kind of like
ooh,
a huge duh, but
well, yeah, right. But they're also saying that, oh, I don't know how this all ties together, and I'm sure it will happen in the upcoming conversation because now I know we have to have it. But it ties into everything you've spoken of today with your family and your dad making an edict that this is how it's going to happen, this is what's going to unfurl.
mhm.
That all comes down to part of what went into you not being able to connect with want.
Well, I am very certain that in my family, that kind of situation of being not just having the ancestral karma passed down from one person to another, but literally having that ancestor or like that portion of that ancestor like literally jump into the next individual and then it being carried on that way because it is very well ensconced. It's like
Mm.
there's like family karma and then there's like on another level. And I
Yeah,
know that that's happened before and I know that's happened with me before because that was my first encounter with past life regression was a previous portion of me telling me you have been this individual multiple times before. And that's kind of like you jump in and you hijack to try to finish that thing that you hadn't finished yet
that is a
instead of
new that is a new level of unfinished business. That is
Yeah,
crazy town, and we're going to save it for a new conversation because that is a whole hour
that
and
is a
40 minutes
whole
in and of itself.
yeah, that's a whole new thing. That is a whole new thing. And we are at our normal wrap it up time.
We
And
are.
I think we've reached a fair. I think we've broken y'all in on what's to come and kind of set the stage for the future conversations that we're going to
Yeah.
have, because
Yeah.
this takes a while. This is a process. This kind of takes a while to go through. So it'll actually be kind of nice to take that journey, I think, with everyone, and share what we go through and all the little hits that we get along the way as we dive in to the season, and not just the fall season or shadow season, but the season of the shift,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. So if you liked what you heard today and you can see yourself diving in, but you want to dive in a bit deeper, stay tuned because we have things in the works for all of you who would like a deeper dive on these topics that we talk about.
Well, do you want me to lead us out?
Sure.
All right. Well, as you may remember, our mission is to empower you. So if you have enjoyed the show, please comment, please like, subscribe, and share. It helps us to empower others. And if you would like to stay up to date with our insights, downloads, and upcoming shows, check us out on Instagram, which is Using Our Inside Voice, all one word. And until next time, this is Jamie.
And this is Heather.
And we are using our outside voice to say stay safe, stay sovereign, and we will see you next time. Peace out.